Hey everybody, welcome. My name is David Robles, and this is my Teach the Class video on the literary term protagonist. As you can see, I've included two separate definitions for the word protagonist, and I think they're both useful, but I like the one on the slide a little better just because it's more all-encompassing. And on this slide, I just wanted to cover the first archetype that we're going to be discussing, and that's the hero. Now, there's a lot of different subgenres of heroes, and there's like a whole tree that I found that is very useful. And I'm sure if you want to get into creative writing, you're familiar with it. And if you're not familiar with it, you can Google it pretty easily. Since this isn't a lecture, we only got 5 minutes, I'm just going to group all of those together and call it the hero category. And the hero category can be pretty simply explained as the good guy, right? It's your Harry Potters, right? The rags to riches kid who always has a pure heart and good intentions and just wants to do the right thing. Superheroes like Wonder Woman or Superman, those type of superheroes, well-intentioned, chiseled, beautiful. And then also, I thought like Luke Skywalker is a pretty good encapsulation, but you could also put Jean-Luc Picard or even Captain Kirk, right? Depending on your style of nerd. Elsa and Hercules there too, representing younger generations. Those really to really well intentioned, the kind of hero you can look up to, right? The kind of protagonist you can look up to is another way to think of this. That's what this archetype, this genre of hero could be categorized as. The second major archetype we're covering is the antihero. And the antihero can be very quickly described as complicated. Not necessarily bad, well-intentioned maybe, hopefully, but definitely interesting and compelling is more important than necessarily good in an antihero. Famous examples of antiheroes that are modern pop culture I've included here. I included the main character from Sharp Objects, but you can include anyone from any Gillian Flynn novel, or any protagonist from any Gillian Flynn novel. I included a picture of the cartoon Hercules murdering his family, because that's what the real mythology, the real fake mythology Hercules did. And then a subverted version of a superhero in someone like Deadpool, Walter White, right? Pretty famous anti-hero. And for the Gen Zers in the crowd, there's a good old Joe from You. I'm not even going to try and talk about that because I've only seen it in passing when my wife watches it. But from what I understand, he's like a weird creeper stalker guy who I think murders people too. But he's the lead role in You. And you care about him, right? You care about his conflict and you want it to resolve well for him. And that's the mark of not just a protagonist, but a good protagonist. Speaking of good protagonists, Game of Thrones. All right, I brought this example because I think it is perfect, very apropos for this discussion. I think that Game of Thrones shows both atypical and typical protagonists. You have your Ned Starks, right, who starts in the first couple seasons as the protagonist, or sorry, the first season at least as the protagonist. And he's this noble, strong man who's got a bunch of kids, and he dies for his principles. And then you have, for more complicated protagonists, like Tyrion Lannister, who from day one is kind of this like man whore, drunkard, who gets himself into a lot of trouble and is very disrespectful. And throughout the show, one, not only does the protagonist change because certain people die and the circumstances change and the political situation changes. So that's a good example that your protagonist, one, doesn't have to stay the same. But two, there's always very clearly, and particularly as the show progresses, it becomes more and more clear that there's more than one protagonist. In the whole overarching story, there's more than one character that we're supposed to care about and keep track of. And so that's just like another good example of how you a protagonist doesn't have to be one thing always. And then the last thing that I think it's a good example for is to show that the importance of a protagonist, because the fantasy genre has been around forever. But the reason Game of Thrones broke through, in my opinion, to the mainstream is the relatability of the characters. Because I know a bunch of sweaty nerds at game stores right now that can give you recommendations for a million different fantasy novels. But none of those are ever going to be as popular as Game of Thrones because Game of Thrones had the best characters and characters that you cared about. You cared what happened to Jon and his wildling girlfriend. You cared to see the if Daenerys breaks the wheel or she just falls to the same problems. And you know, a good, as much flack as they got for the end of the series, justifiably so in my opinion, it just goes to show how much people cared about the show and how much people were invested. Um, and so yeah, that's it. That's all I got on protagonists. If you have any questions, feel free to email Professor King. I'm sure she'll answer them promptly. Um, Other than that, stay safe, wash your hands, don't go outside, stay on your phones, do whatever, but just do it inside. Okay, bye.